This is the Rapid Response series, Did You Know? CIUS Answers, a response to your questions about Russia's war against Ukraine. We continue responding to your questions about Ukraine, Ukrainian history, and the current war against Ukraine. Dr. Heather Coleman, Professor and Associate Chair of Department of History, Classics and Religion at the University of Alberta and current Director of the Program on Religion and Culture at CIUS, is back to help us navigate the complex issues the world is asking about. My question for you today, Heather, what is the relationship between the Patriarch and Putin?
The invasion of Ukraine has revealed a religious aspect to the conflict that many people were not aware of. We've seen images of the Russian President Vladimir Putin together with Patriarch Kirill of the Russian Orthodox Church. We've been hearing about religious justifications of the invasion, but also about religious protest. So what is the relationship between Patriarch Kirill and Putin, and more generally, between the Russian Orthodox Church and the Russian state? First, I think I should say a few words about the position of the Russian Orthodox Church in Russia. Russia is a multi-ethnic and multi-religious country. The largest faith is Orthodox Christianity, but there's also a substantial Muslim population and smaller Protestant, Jewish, and Buddhist communities, among others. The 1993 Constitution established a separation of church and state, and it promised the equality of all religions. But in that early period following the collapse of communism, the Russian Orthodox Church strove to restore orthodoxy, which had been the state church in pre-revolutionary Russia, to a prominent position in Russian society. Although interestingly, it also rejected the idea of being a state church. In 1997, the church achieved a major success with the passage of the Law on Freedom of Conscience and Religious Organizations, which favors so-called traditional faiths, and especially orthodoxy, which in fact also contradicts the 1993 Constitution that spoke of the equality of faiths. Orthodoxy is especially mentioned in the 1997 law as, quote, an inseparable part of the all-Russian historical, spiritual, and cultural heritage. And it's the only faith eligible for state subsidies to maintain, quote, monuments of history and culture, in other words, to maintain churches. Although the Orthodox Church on the ground actually remains ideologically diverse and often acts as a force for civil society, since the late 1990s, and especially since Kirill Gundaev became patriarch in 2009, the church leadership has embraced a missionary vision to re-Christianize Russian Orthodox space. This vision challenges pluralism, rejects the Western secular discourses on human rights, and it argues for a distinctive Russian civilization. In fact, before he became patriarch, Kirill led the development of the key document that outlines this strategy. The document is called the Social Concept of the Russian Orthodox Church, and it was adopted in the year 2000. The Social Concept document rejects the idea of a state church and repudiates state interference in church affairs. It also assumes that Russia is a predominantly Orthodox society, that's how it describes Russia, and it advocates cooperation between church and state in a wide range of domains. So in education, in social work, there's a huge long list, chaplains in hospitals and so on. Basically, the church is to be a bridge between the state and society. Another interesting component of the social concept is that it declares that, and I'll just quote it here, the principle of freedom of conscience is not a natural human condition. The appearance of this concept is a result of the disintegration of the system of spiritual values. Kirill has consistently warned that Western liberalism constitutes a danger to Russia's quote unquote spiritual health. And those warnings have resonated with the Putin regime. The Putin regime has had a long-standing discourse, really since the year 2000 when Putin became president, about the so-called spiritual security of Russia and the need to preserve that spiritual security. Since coming to power, Putin has consistently sought to define opposition as extremism. So a 2002 law called On Combating Extremist Activity defines extremism very broadly as stirring up of social, racial, ethnic, or religious discord. On that basis, various amendments to the 1997 law also address religious extremism. And these provisions together have been used against various Muslim groups, but also to ban the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Salvation Army, and as some of you will remember, the famous video of the punk band Pussy Riot doing their 2012 performance of an anti-Putin song in an important Moscow cathedral. Putin and Patriarch Kirill have also cooperated in championing a vision of the so-called Russian world. Putin sponsored the establishment of the Russian World Foundation in 2007 to promote Russian language and culture in the world. At the Russian World Assemblies in 2009 and 2010, Patriarch Kirill spoke of the Russian world as an alternative civilization rooted in traditional Orthodox values that he contrasted with Western individualism and liberalism. This is a transnational community for him, one that's defined by the area of the Moscow Patriarchate's jurisdiction, encompassing Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and the Russian emigre Orthodox churches abroad. Patriarch Kirill began around this time to regularly visit sites in Ukraine associated with the Christianization of Rus, the Christianization of the medieval people who later become Russians or Ukrainians and Belarusians. He regularly visited Kiev and Crimea and spoke about them as the birthplace of Holy Rus. When the Russian annexation of Crimea took place in 2014, the Russian Orthodox Church presented the situation as a civil war amongst Ukrainians and called for peace and reiterated this Russian worldview, declaring that Ukrainians and Russians and Belarusians shared a common past in the baptism of Grand Prince Volodymyr of Kiev in Crimea in the 10th century, and thus they share a common future. Now, needless to say, this expansionist nationalist vision elicited considerable protest in Ukraine. Another area of cooperation between president and patriarch has been in military matters. And this is quite interesting because the social concept document, as I mentioned, has a very long list of areas of common interest between church and state, and war is not on that list. But in practice, the church already under Kirill's predecessor had tried to include Orthodox education in military training, not all that successfully. But they did secure chaplains in the army and controversially supported Putin's war in Chechnya. And Kirill, likewise, has actively supported Russian involvement in the war in Syria, presenting that war in this kind of civilizational light, presenting it as the defense of persecuted Christians. I think it's important to realize that although President Putin describes himself as an Orthodox believer and likes to trot out the patriarch for important events, he's worked closely with the patriarch. It's largely Putin in the driver's seat. The church offers its services to the state, and the state does not always accept them. I should also emphasize that this strategy of Patriarch Kirill, although it is the official policy of the church, is not uncontroversial within the Russian Orthodox Church. All of this came together with the invasion of Ukraine. The Patriarch has supported the so-called military operation from the start. And he's done it using the language of the Russian world and the language of an alternative, traditional Russian civilization. Many outside observers were puzzled by his sermon of March 6th, when he claimed that Russia was defending the rights of the separatists in the Donbass region to not have to participate in gay pride parades. But those of us who've been studying this for a while can see this as part of this long-standing civilizational anti-human rights traditionalist discourse that Kirill has been key to devising and expounding. In his sermon of March 13th, he spoke explicitly of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus forming the so-called Russian land. He acknowledged that bishops belonging to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church which is a large denomination in Ukraine that is under the jurisdiction of the Moscow Patriarchate. He acknowledged that bishops in that church were refusing to pray for him since the invasion. But he claimed that they were doing that because they were fearful of Ukrainian nationalists. However, Patriarch Kirill's support of the war is causing great distress, not just among Ukrainian Orthodox, but in the wider Orthodox world. Distress that will no doubt have major implications for the authority of the Russian Orthodox Church and of Patriarch Kirill as its leader after the war.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you for your questions. Please keep sending them in, and CIUS will continue to answer them.